Cameron, thanks so much indeed for your time. Can you just try to see through the fog of what's going on at the moment and explain to us where Omar al Bashir sits in the current sort of dynamic of this power struggle that's going on at the moment?
Well, he's essentially outside of the power struggle that's going on at the moment. I mean, he's been in detention for the past 2 years. Let's remember that it was the military that removed Omar al Bashir from power in the face of overwhelming pro-democracy protests back in 2019. They were calling for the end of the regime. The military, to save themselves, removed Omar al Bashir from power, assuming and thinking that that would assuage the pro-democracy protesters. That has clearly not been the case. So now you have a situation where Bashir is still in office or still in detention, but the protests have not subsided. They're in fact gaining strength right now.
But how much support does Bashir still have amongst those higher-ranking members of the military?
Well, I think it's hard to say. Clearly, the military has jettisoned Bashir as a way of saving themselves, and so I don't think that you will find anybody, publicly coming to the rescue of the former president. There are clearly elements of the military who maintain sympathies for Bashir, and more importantly, who have great sympathy for just the former regime and for the position of authority that they had under President Bashir. Let's remember that as part of this transitional government, there was a committee being put in place that was intended to dismantle the former regime, to seize the assets of the former regime, and to make public all of the sort of corruption cases that the former regime was behind. The military has suspended the work of that committee with the coup d'etat in October. So clearly, their accountability for past crimes, not just for President Bashir, but for their part in his regime.
Why do you think he hasn't been handed over to the ICC yet?
Well, I think it's an important bargaining chip for the military right now. It's something that they can hold on to and use potentially as leverage going forward. If, again, they need to show, some movement on justice and accountability, they would rather see justice and accountability for President Bashir than for themselves. So they always have that card to play by keeping him in office right now. I think there's probably also a concern about what other secrets Bashir could reveal in a trial and whether or not their own culpability could come under higher focus if he was turned in, and if ICC investigators were able to mount a full investigation of all of the crimes related to the Bashir era, of which many people in government right now have responsibility.
Yeah, Cameron, what do you think the prosecution will have in terms of it trying to prove that Bashir was directly responsible for the crimes for which he's accused? Because obviously, as you're saying, some of the members of the military might be thinking, hold on, he's going to throw us under the bus and he's going to blame us.
Well, I think it all depends on the degree of freedom that the ICC investigators have. Will they have access to Sudanese intelligence archives? Will they have access to the military's archives? Will they have access to U.S. and other countries' intelligence dating back to that era? They are going to have to prove in a court of law that President Bashir was directly part of the decision-making and, in fact, leading the decision-making process around not just individual crimes that were committed, but the strategy behind them, and really to demonstrate the intent behind these crimes. That's a tall order. Obviously, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence in the public record already, but it will require that ICC investigators really have a free hand in this investigation, and I suspect they won't be able to have that until we see a civilian government in office in Sudan willing to grant them that kind of access.
Cameron, for years, of course, Omar al Bashir avoided going to many countries because he was worried about being arrested. But he would go to some sort of friendlier African countries. We just saw some pictures of him shaking hands with Uganda's longtime president, Yoweri Museveni. Just give us a brief analysis of what you think the thoughts may be in the minds of other African leaders who've been in power for decades and may have been abusing their people.
Well, let's remember that in the years leading up to the ICC indictment against President Bashir, he led essentially a Pan-African movement to have the ICC, rejected by other African heads of state and kept out of the African continent, right? Painting the ICC as a kind of tool of Western imperialism aimed at African countries. And so Bashir built up a huge following among other African leaders around that. I think that there's probably still some sympathy for those views, especially among certain leaders who have their own checkered histories.
OK, Cameron, thank you so much indeed. Really appreciate it. Cameron Hudson, who is the Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Africa Centre. And of course, as we end this news hour, remember that dozens of people, at least 60, have been killed, according to the Sudanese Doctors Association, during the latest protests against the military junta that is currently in power in Sudan, with the democratic transition in the country under severe threat.